Hello, Ms. Abbott's class. Welcome to Nebraska State Poet live from my basement slash garage because it's 2020. That's how we roll. But I'm here to talk about creative writing, especially poetry, a little bit about Poetry Slam. As I said, I'm the Nebraska State Poet. I have two books published. I've got a third coming out later this year. I have traveled the world with poetry. I've done State Department programs in 4 different countries. I've been around the country with poetry. It's been a good thing for me. So, I'm going to read some poems, ramble a bit. You've got me some questions that I can answer. But ultimately, we'll do a little talking about writing. So, you ready? I don't know. I'm in my garage and you're in a classroom like probably several days later. Again, 2020. So, I figured I'd start with a poem that's a little bit about why I'm in my garage. This is a poem I wrote earlier in this pandemic. It's called After One Last Trip to the Store. We all came home and locked the door. Ready, we felt, to wait out this threat that swept country to state, and we had toilet paper, coffee, and pasta, enough dish soap, enough sugar, and we looked at one another, then went to different rooms to wait. And we had Disney Plus and Netflix. We had YouTube recipes from celebrities' kitchens, concerts broadcast from condominium bathrooms, tributes to Ellis Marcellus, Bill Withers, prayers for John Prine, the news anchors in their basements, live, telling us how many people died overnight while we waited. Well, we talked about restaurants, about canceled events, movie theaters, our friends, our offices. We started to wonder, was that enough toilet paper after all? Does anybody know how long it's been? And we broke out the Monopoly board, read poetry books, started pasta craft projects, looked out the windows less and less. Stop turning the TV on for the politicians, the governor, the news. We wonder, will someone find us someday as the ghosts of who we locked in here? Souls that tired of waiting, though kept on waiting. Our bodies lighter, our spirits feverish, bright, impossible to recognize. There you go. That's a poem of mine. Yeah, as you might be able to tell, I've been a little bit hardcore isolated, social distancing. Got my family here, but for the most part, we've stayed pretty put. I'm a diabetic, so I especially am working in any way to keep me and everyone home and in my basement and not going crazy at all. Not at all. All right. But let's go to your questions. A few of them. So, the first question I've got here is, when did you realize you had a talent for writing? That's a good question. I think for me, I don't know that I ever ultimately, I started writing when I was in high school. So and I wrote just to make sense of the world around me, to figure things out. Things like dating, politics, just random hormonal confusions and changes in brain things that happen at any age, but at some ages more. So I was writing really to figure out so many things for myself, about the world and about myself. So that's when it started. And I think whether I'd had any of the successes I've had, whether I had books out or not, I'd still be reading or still be writing. And because it's for me joy, and for me it's healing, and for me it's psychological, and for me it's investigative. So it's all these different things that I just love. So that's what keeps me writing. I think when I discovered I had at least a talent for it in the respect that other people might value it too, because it had a value for myself. So to myself, I'm talented and my mom likes me. But I think the first few times I had a few poems picked up by magazines to be published. First few times I went to open mics and people, liked what I was reading. Those were good things. So I think it comes small, but ultimately, whether I had a talent for writing or not, I would still be writing. Because writing itself is worthwhile, no matter how good or not so good you are at it. And I think the more you do anything, you get better. And I've worked very hard at it. I don't think I'm a natural writer. I think I'm an okay writer. I think my talent though is I'm a really good editor. And I think the years of practice and the years of working on it with both the writing and the editing are really what's made me better. But the first things I write down tend to be pretty good. I have good ideas. I put them down. And it's like, yeah, that's all right. And then I go back and back and back and change it and make it better. And that's part of the process for me that I think is a lot of fun, is just really seeing a poem that you created and see it grow to be more than what you had when you started is really exciting. Sometimes frustrating, but ultimately pretty exciting. So yeah, kind of related poems, sort of, or related questions. How often do you get writer's block? And for me, my whole process is a pretty good way of fighting writer's block, because I make myself write a poem every week. So I've got a deadline of Monday night. I'll write a poem. I'll be looking for a poem all week. You adhere to, if you've got that deadline in your head and you really want to be serious about it, you're looking for things to write about. And hopefully you'll find something and write the poem before Monday. And sometimes it's come to Monday and I've got nothing. And I sit down and I write. And sometimes it's terrible. It's practice. Sometimes, though, I'm surprised. I sit down with no idea just because of the deadline, and I've written some very good poems. And that's ultimately what writer's block is, I think, is just your fear that you're going to write something that's not good. And I'm well over that. By forcing myself to write every week, I've written so many bad poems. And there's realized you write a bad poem and what's the worst that happens? Nothing. You just don't show it to other human beings. You write that bad poem, you count it off as practice. And I keep mine because sometimes I'll go back and steal something from it or find a way to make that poem itself better. Or you can always burn it too. You got options. It's your poem. So yeah, writer's block is just that fear of writing something bad, and get over that fear by writing plenty of bad things, or uninteresting things, or just things that other people aren't going to care about. And that's fine. That's practice. When we play guitar, we don't, count every minute playing guitar as a performance. A lot of the times we're playing, it's practice. Same with sports, basketball, volleyball. We have to practice to really move on somewhere. And I'm fine with practice. I've done a lot of it. So how do I overcome writer's block? Yeah, I write terrible things. It's okay. And that's the main thing. Because a lot of times you've got this terrible idea or lack of idea that you just have to kind of flush out of the pipes of your head, because behind it there might be a good idea or something much better coming along. So that's how it works. But mostly it's just letting yourself write whatever happens. Otherwise I wouldn't have poems like this, which just I wrote on an airplane, and it's strange. And you'll find most of my poems don't rhyme. I love poems that rhyme. I play with sound in my poems and I connect sections by rhyming, but not everything rhymes. and I totally good with that. I love rhyming poems. I love free verse, non-rhyming poems. So just a note, since we're talking poetry, and a lot of times we look at poems as things that have to rhyme, and yeah, I'm good. So this poem is called "You Are Not an On-Edge Flyer, But." You are not an on-edge flyer, but the sky is gravel roading tonight. Each pothole-ish bump, each swivel, and you have to concentrate on how bored the stewardess looks to tell yourself you probably aren't going to die. But your face still twitches. Hands become part of the armrest. Your daughter turned 9 yesterday. Wife 40 the day before. All beauty and joy on the earth, hundreds of miles behind you. And holy cow, you've lived a good long life, but whoa, what is it in the air or the machinery that does that? And what was that? You don't understand the science of a building with wings hucked into the atmosphere. This doesn't sound at all what you've seen from the law of gravity. You, who could never make a paper airplane stay up more than 3 roller coaster seconds of twist and twist and... And the woman seated next to you. You haven't spoken, but you're pretty sure she's been stealing looks at this poem and is a little freaked out. You realize there is no physics here. This is entirely faith. You are told to accept this Superman of sausage casing as a thing that is plausible under the laws of nature, told to accept whatever miracle, not because it makes sense, but because it just keeps happening. So hey, accept this water to wine, this Lazarus. The lepers, yeah, they're great. This thing, sure, it's gonna get you to Phoenix. The swerve in your stomach is not about the end. The plummet, the supernova of every brain cell, skin cell, bone, blood, squizzled pop of spine, making up this you. So let it be written. So let it be done. Amen. All right. So that's a poem. I mentioned Poetry Slam earlier. That's a poem I've used in Poetry Slams. Poetry Slams are competition poetry readings. It's a way of presenting poetry that's kind of a gimmick. It's mostly to make poetry more accessible to an audience, because it started in a bar in Chicago in the 80s. A guy who was running it, brought to this crowd of police officers, construction workers, teachers, unemployed people, students, brought them scorecards. So a poet would come to the front of the room, and then 5 random people would hold up a number from 0 to 10. These are not experts. These are just people in an audience, in a bar, scoring poetry. So it doesn't mean that the best poet is going to win, but it throws that competitive aspect into a poetry reading. So a poet, you want to make your poem come to life. You want to spell things out. Your audience, they got one chance to understand it before they give you a score. So you got to help them understand it with how you present it. And I think it's been a very good thing for poetry. There's not any one kind of poem that you would see at a poetry slam. To me, there's no such thing as slam poetry. There are poems that you're more likely to see at a poetry slam event. Things like rants or, kind of 3-minute monologues or things like that. But I've also seen haiku used well in a poetry slam, or sonnets. You can really bring any kind of poem in to an event like that, but it makes it fun. I think for a long time, we were taught to believe that poems are these inaccessible things that are smarter than us. No, poems are stupid. There's poems about Cheetos, pork rinds, bugs, I don't know, whatever. You can write poems about anything. And I think that's what we should be doing. Writing poems about what we think there should be more poems about. Yes, of course, write about love, write about war, write about death, all that. I certainly have. But write about the small things too, right? That's really what's special about poetry. I think poetry is supposed to connect people and connect our ideas, ideally. And sometimes we run across a lot of poems, especially when I was in school, a lot of poems that do not connect me with the poet, do not, they did more to confuse me than connect me. So I love the fact that we're kind of changing the direction of poetry every year. So, yes. All right, more questions. What was your pathway to success? Gosh, I guess just persistence for me. I've been writing for more than 30 years regularly, and just doing what I love. And that's a big thing. If I didn't love poetry, I would have quit it years ago. I would have gone on to something different. Or if poetry didn't add to my life. So I found the right thing, but mostly I've just been persistent. If you see the poems that I wrote when I first started, the first, 5-6 years of writing poems, which you will never see them because I don't think they're that good for other people. They're good for me. They're like time capsules of things I was going through or encountering, but the writing is, it's iffy. But I kept going. I kept getting better. I kept writing iffy poems so that I could write better poems all the time. And I did get better. So learned from that and learned from others. Another key to success is you read a lot as well as write a lot. So find other writers you like and see what they do well and learn from them. Talk to other writers, meet other writers, things like that. Speaking of which, giant finger. When you, if you are interested in doing more writing, there is a writing club at your school. Talk to Ms. Dowell. Do you know Dowell? Find Ms. Dowell. Ms. Abbotts can help connect you if you don't know. But there's a link to a Google Classroom for virtual meetings every Thursday, 3:15 to 4:15 p.m. You can meet on the Google Classroom from home or from the classroom. There are flyers around the school, I think, so you can find more information that way. But Thursdays, 3:15 to 4:15, Ms. Dowell. There's a writing club that's with the Louder Than a Bomb Great Plains Poetry Festival, which I run a nonprofit, the Nebraska Writers Collective, that runs Louder Than a Bomb. And all Louder Than a Bomb is students writing poetry and competing against other schools with your poetry. So it's a poetry slam where schools compete against schools. We're doing it differently this year because we may not be able to get everyone in a room together in the spring. Like we had to cancel the last year's festival because it was supposed to start basically a couple days after everyone started locking down. This year it's going to be, we're working on things like a poetry anthology, and there'll be prizes for students. So you submit a written poem. The best poems from students, as chosen by some judges, will get into an anthology. And so publication and a little bit of money. We're also having a video contest of you reading your poem that we'll be giving out awards for. This is all in the spring. So meet up with the folks with Ms. Dowell's classroom, and there's coaches who are helping you write and other students who you'll be writing with. So jump in. It's a lot of fun. More questions though. So there's a lot of questions here about fiction. What things inspire you to write the plots to books and things like that. I'm not a fiction writer. I don't write novels, so I'm not the best person to answer those. But uh-oh, my computer just is shutting down. Are you still recording? Hello? Come back. Uh-oh. Oh, computers. How you vex me. All right. So there's questions about fiction, and I'm the wrong person to ask. But I mean, I can still answer. So I will give you answers, but I wouldn't trust my answers. So what things inspire you to write the plots to books? Ducks. Ducks. Plot is all about ducks. How do you recommend trying to form transitions between parts of stories while keeping the pacing right? I recommend that while you write, you listen to French rock and roll music. It'll help you pace naturally. How long does it usually take to write a chapter? 12 seconds. Yes. All right, back to some poetry questions though. What was your inspiration for writing your famous piece? So I think my most famous poem is from my second book. And it's called Notes for My Daughters Against Chasing Storms. And I wrote this poem won a pretty big award, a Pushcart Prize, and it's just done me well. And this poem, I used to work for a freelance video photography crew. So we'd be covering news stories, and we were covering weather stories out in Kearney, Nebraska. So just a few hours west of here. And we're there. I'm the sound guy, so I'm holding the mic, boom mic above people. And so me, the camera person, it was for, I think, NBC Network. So they flew in a correspondent. So they spent a lot of money on this weather day. So the weather was supposed to be terrible in Kearney. Huge storms. And a storm came through. Wasn't a lot that really happened though, so we spent most of the day sitting in a parking lot that had the most damage that you could see with the correspondent, doing live shots every hour or whatever, breaking into whoever. But we didn't really have a lot to do that day. So I spent most of the day sitting in a parking lot, and I started writing. And I started writing about some of the things around me that I could see. And then things went in a different direction, which is kind of fun. I love when I'm writing a poem and just something happens, something surprises me, something changes. So this poem is called Notes for My Daughter Against Chasing Storms. Tornadoes swing through like a kid playing hopscotch, rip one house to splinters, leave the neighbors untouched, up and down, here and there. They flatten churches on Easter Sunday, take up whole towns by the roots, drive a piece of straw into a tree, stick a single 2x4 into a roof, declare it art, stack a car on a motorcycle, call it a night. And that, my daughter, is how teenage boys approach love. I don't say that like it is evil, more like an amoral force of nature. They look all pleasant showers before they tear your roof off and leave your trees in shreds. So you may dream of his blue eyes, cloud-free compliments, the music he likes, the motorcycle he drives, the great tattoos he's got on his neck. But when the skies turn that yellow, that green, when hail starts popping through air fit to boil, you listen to my forecast. You leave the car parked, grab a flashlight with one hand, blanket with the other, go for the basement. Now you run. There you go. There's a poem about a dad trying to figure things out while sitting in a parking lot. Who knows? All right. other questions. When and how did you know you were going to be an author? I mean, as I said, I'd probably been writing for years, not thinking of myself as an author, not thinking I was going to be an author. Um, but I think that maybe when I got into grad school, I got into graduate school for creative writing, and that was a big thing to get accepted into a really good program. And that probably is the clearest moment. Who knows? What made you want to be an author? How did you start? And I think I talked about that earlier. It's really just about writing for myself, for personal reasons, because I love it. I enjoy the whole process of writing. I enjoy figuring things out by writing about them. And that's really what got me started, and just staying with it. So, do you still get anxiety over presenting and performing? Yes, I do. I do a lot of presentations. I do readings. In a better world, I come into classrooms a lot, and it's still a little nervous. But I'm used to it, at least at this point. And sometimes I've gone into a lot of classrooms where 90% of the students are like, "Oh, poetry," and paying no attention. But it's those 10% who really want to know a little bit more. They make it more than worth it. So it's just kind of learning that and learning how to deal with different audiences, because it's weird. You can't always read an audience. I've done readings where I would read a poem and there would be no reaction from the audience, no applause, no movement, just kind of like, and thinking, wow, I am doing terrible. So, and then at the end of those readings, typically people will come up to me and go, "Oh my gosh, this was amazing. I love this poem." And they'll recite back lines to me where I'm thinking they weren't paying any attention. They'll buy books. You never know. Poetry is one of those odd things that you can't always judge by the immediate reaction what's going on. So I still get nervous because you just never know what's going to happen. But I trust enough that in my work that I read, that I'll reach at least some of the audience, hopefully all of the audience, and see what happens. So, what is your favorite poem? I mean, for me, I really love, there's a Samuel Taylor Coleridge poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which a lot of people read in schools, so you may have come across it. It's a long poem. It's like 14 pages long. Coleridge was writing 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago in Britain. And I love a lot about his writing. He was writing about social justice. He was writing about the poor. He was writing about uplifting people. But this poem, it's a zombie movie in the form of a poem. It is bizarre. It is weird. There's a lot of lines from it that have become part of, the speech. All creatures great and small is a phrase that gets used a lot. It comes from this. Water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. From this poem, the albatross around someone's neck, we know that as a metaphor. That comes from this poem. So it's long. It's like 14 pages long. It's weird. It's bizarre. I love it. I just think it's a great poem. So yeah, that's probably my favorite. There's a lot of other ones. There's great poets like Mary Oliver, Denise Duhamel, Patricia Smith. There's Galway Cannell is another of my favorites. There's so many good writers out there, so many, and a lot of great, amazing local writers too. Stacey Waite is over in Lincoln. Ted Kuzer's over around Lincoln. In Omaha, Zadika Poindexter is a fantastic writer. There's so many good writers to find. And that's the thing. Poetry is pretty wide. So if you're not finding a lot of poems that you like, keep looking. Whatever you like poetry or whatever you like outside of poetry, you'll find someone who's writing good poems about those. So there are great football poems, baseball poems, volleyball poems, dance poems, war poems, historical poems, love poems, flower poems, whatever you're interested in, you'll find somebody writing really, really good about it. Because poetry is not one big monolithic thing that either we like or we don't like. Inside poetry, there's genres. There's 100 different genres inside poetry. It's up to you to find that genre of poetry that you like most. You might like lyric poems. You might like African American oral tradition poems. You might like poems that rhyme, poems that don't rhyme, classic poems, sonnets, rants. There's just all kinds of different poems. Find the ones that you like and write some more. So, all right, where were we on the list? If you could, what would you tell your younger writing self? That's a tough one, and I might have to cheat and say I would not tell them anything because I think things have worked out pretty well, pretty decently. So I would tell my younger writing self, good job. You might think you're totally not doing anything meaningful right now, but it's working. Because for a long time, I did. I started writing in high school. I worked on it more in college where I really found poets that I loved reading. So that was a big change. So I was really growing as a writer. I wanted to keep learning about writing. And so after college, I would go to bookstores like, oh, this book won the National Book Award. I will read it. Okay, it didn't do anything for me. But I'd find a few books, maybe good. And I wasn't sure what I was writing was even poetry because I was writing weird, kind of funny, strange things. And then I wasn't finding award-winning books of poetry that did that. So I was like, maybe I'm doing something completely different, but it looks like a poem. I don't know. It took a while, but I eventually found some poets who were doing that. And, Galway Connell is one of the poets I mentioned loving earlier. Found him really through him writing poems that I wished I was writing. He was writing these weird, funny poems, and some very serious poems, obviously, too. But it made me see that what I was doing, it is poetry. It's okay. So, yeah. Where do you get inspiration? I get inspiration from just around me. I've got 2 daughters. A lot of inspiration there in the house. From my wife, from the newspaper, from TV. I get inspiration kind of from everywhere. Like my second book is all about poems about being a dad. So things by having kids that inspired me to write. I'm working on a book of poems that's all about Disneyland. I don't know why. I can't control what happens, but those are the ideas that were coming. So I started writing, and next thing I know, it's getting to be a book. Yeah, things that interest me, I just start writing. So, with my weekly deadline, I am looking for things in my life to write about. The way a tree looks out a window is different one day. That might be a poem. There's a lot in the pandemic, so there's a lot to write poems about there. So, in fact, I'll read you a new poem. It's a brand new poem. How many time? All right. So this is a brand new poem just thinking about my mom. She passed away 6 years ago. So it's called 6 Years After Mom. I feel the emptiness where you were standing. This is not an I miss you, like it is a hole in every photo since you died. The light never right, cropped awkwardly because you're not there. And that is it. Days after a world made largely from you. And how do we walk in this space? Kids in a classroom waiting for the teacher who doesn't show. We wonder, what do we do? Should we wait? Leave? What do we do? We fell apart individually in our ways, felt fractures between us. Even with the worn notebook you left us with everyone's birthday, address, phone numbers scratched, replaced. It took me years to lift your phone number out of my phone. I don't remember it now. I wish I could put it back. Poem for my mom. Just one of those things that some days you find yourself missing someone more. Write a poem about them. Trying to find one more question before we close here. What is your favorite part of writing a book? Examples: the planning, the draft, the publication, the beginning, the end, the feedback, etc. When I write a book of poetry, I just write poems and then figure out which poems will go in kind of together. Sometimes that's by theme. Sometimes it's just this poem could flow into something with this other poem. So that's like my second book. It's all about being a dad. My first book is a lot of poems that kind of roundabout, but thematically kind of work together. So I think the best part for me of putting a book of poems together is just figuring out what will work with each other. Like this, sometimes I'm putting together a manuscript of poems, and maybe my favorite poem doesn't fit in there because it just doesn't sit well with all the other poems. So it's figuring that out, which is a lot of fun. I end up with sheets of poems spread all around a room, on the floor, on the couches, as I kind of walk around and find what will go next to each other. It's a lot of fun. And it's comes after years of writing poems and then figuring out what poems maybe are my favorites or maybe have been published in a magazine, so at least have other eyes that have told me that they're good too. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So, all right. With that, I think we better close. You've been a wonderful class. You've been very attentive, hopefully. But again, check out the Thursday after school meetups with Writing with Ms. Dowell. If you have a question, ask your teacher. They'll help connect you. Or if you have more questions for me, pass it on to Ms. Abbotts and she'll get it to me. But thank you much. Go write, do good things, write poems, write those other things too. Yeah, but mostly write poems.